If my business partner is also the God of the universe, I'm not sure why my business is just doing fine and why I'm just doing fine. Surely it should be better than that. We do need to acknowledge that real change takes time. Deep change takes time, but it's worth it because
Welcome back and thanks for listening. This is Jim Piper and the Today Counts show. I have a wonderful lady with me today, Kim Avery. Kim has a unique way at going at coaching. It's similar to mine, but it's really different also. And so I'm excited to talk to her about the coaching business, about what she has been learning, about what she provides. Really excited to get involved in this conversation with Kim. Kim, hello and welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me today, Jim.
So Kim, you wrote a book. It's called The Prayer-Powered Entrepreneur. Now, before you respond to that, for those of you hardcore businessmen and ladies, and you heard me say the prayer-powered entrepreneur, and you're going, gosh, I don't have time for that. Business is practical, concrete, hard-nosed, cutthroat, all those kinds of things. All the more, I want you to hear us out on this thing called the Prayer-Powered Entrepreneur. When did you write the book? Obviously, I kind of know what the book's about. I have not read it yet, but you know, what are you trying to get across in this book?
Yeah, I wrote the book it hit the shelves anyway in 2020, and I wrote it because I needed it. Prior to that, I'd been in business for probably 10 or 15 years. And after about the first 5 years in business, Jim, there was one Christmas. I know it's not Christmas time, but there was one Christmas I was sick and I had the flu, and I wasn't so sick I couldn't eat or move, but I couldn't get off the couch and work. So I just thought for 2 weeks, which is always an interesting exercise. Anyway, so as I was thinking, I was kind of evaluating my business. I was working as a business coach at the time and helping other entrepreneurs start and grow their businesses. And I thought, I feel pretty good about this year. We're wrapping up. It's end of year. Numbers look good. That's fine. Systems seem fine. Everything seemed fine. My clients are doing fine. And it hit me. I'm actually a Christian, a person of faith, and a believer in the Almighty God. And I thought, if my business partner is also the God of the universe, I'm not sure why my business is just doing fine and why I'm just doing fine. Surely it should be better than that. And so it sent me on a hunt through scripture, beginning to end, thinking, what does God promise me as my business partner? And I know that I know. So not a certain amount of income, not a Lamborghini, not a certain vacation in the Caribbean, but what does he for sure promise me in scripture that he is for me in this, and we really are partnering together. And by the time I got done with that, I had 31 kind of very specific promises. So I could pray over one a day every month. I'm a bear of very small brain, as Winnie the Pooh would say. Just take kind of one prayer point per day.
Okay.
And pray it all through the day. Lord, today help me to be trustworthy. Help me to be a person of my word. And I could watch in this conversation, in this podcast, in this business deal, was I trustworthy? How did he provide me opportunities to be trustworthy? And at the end of the day, I could see the answer. And so it really helped me in my partnership with God, which is such a relief because he's actually a much better business person than I am.
That's really good. So is that the book, the 31 Promises? Is that the idea?
Yeah. So it has a little bit of front matter, but it's 31 days, right?
Okay.
Of, trusting God with your business and having greater joy and less stress, which we all want. And it's very practical. It has a short reading to go with each day and then a short prayer prompt, which is based on a scripture. And then it's a treasure hunt throughout the day. How is God going to show up when I'm asking him today to help me be bold, help me be strategic, help me be Christ-saturated? At the end of the day, I can always see, how did God answer that prayer?
So it sounds to me like it's something you could read over and over and add it as a habit in your life. Are you getting feedback in that way that's how some people are using it?
Yes, for sure. And it's actually a lot of fun. Plus, you always know where you are. So today we're recording this conversation on the 12th. The 12th is rely on God's power. And so throughout the whole day, I'm thinking, okay, he can do abundantly far more than anything I ask or think. I want to rely on his power as I go through the day. And I hear this from other people who have bought the book that, yeah, it's just a habit. It's incremental training in trusting, not striving, and getting supernatural power into our business, not just natural power.
Yeah, I like that. A lot of the men and women that I have the opportunity to work with, if we get to talk about spiritual things or needing guidance from the invisible God that we believe is certainly real, I often suggest that they get a Bible if they don't have one, or I'll even buy them one sometimes, and I'll encourage them to read the chapter in Proverbs, which is generally known, as you probably know, as the book of wisdom, correlating to the day of the month. So like you were saying, if it's the 5th day of the month, I'm going to read Proverbs 5, which is really kind of cool, because if I skip a couple days and now it's the 8th, I don't need to try to catch up. I just read the 8th. But I think how your book differentiates a little bit about that, since it's also scripture based, is that it sounds simply like each day is more focused. It's focused, whereas you might see a theme in a chapter of Proverbs, but most of the time it's a collection, of wise thoughts, and not necessarily this laser focused chapter. I think I'm seeing that you've talked about.
Yeah. I think we know, Jim, that globally that God is for us, that he loves us, that he's promised to provide, but that doesn't seem to translate on a granular level unless we really do dial in the focus and look, what we pay attention to is what we notice, and what we notice is what we put our time to and what we reap.
Yeah.
And so dialing in very specifically helps us to see answers to prayer. It's not this abstract, Lord bless my business, amen. It's, seeing him show up in small ways throughout the day, and it just builds our faith and our ability to trust him even more and more.
How long does it take to read each of your 31 chapters?
4 minutes?
4 minutes?
Probably. I've never timed it, but they're short.
Yeah. So depending upon a person's pace, or a person's temperament, or habits, or conditions that they have to deal with, it could even be something that they use midday. They could use it in the morning, midday, an evening, whatever. But it does seem like you've written it at the starting line, is the feeling that I get. Whatever your starting line, get you focused and get you in that way. You also have, and I assume the prayer powered entrepreneur, we can get that on Amazon.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And then you also have a podcast called The Pace of Grace, the Pace of Grace podcast. Tell us a little bit about that.
This came out of the most recent years, since we went through this kind of worldwide pandemic, which impacted all of us in some ways, and other people kind of call it the great revealer. And what came up is that we're all a whole lot more stressed than we admitted. We're all closer to burnout, especially business people and entrepreneurs have a much higher level of burnout and depression. Because the responsibility is so squarely on our shoulders, and we feel that. And for some reason, I think that 2020 woke us all up to this situation that, I'm not sure I can carry this. I'm not sure this is sustainable. I'm not well. Maybe my business is okay, but I as a person am not really doing well. My relationships are suffering. Other things are suffering. And the people I was working with were just no exceptions. Their businesses and their ministries were actually fine, similar to mine was when I wrote the book. But they're like, I'm not well, And so I've really decided to kind of, again, deconstruct. What is it that brings us peace and joy and helps us operate at God's pace of grace? And so through that journey, I started this podcast, and it's short form, very grace filled, right? 15 minutes that comes out once a week. Just again, reminding us and deconstructing the basics of how do I actually walk at God's pace of grace, not ahead of him, not behind him, enjoying this easy yoke of Jesus instead of feeling the heavy weight of this burden. And so it's very soul filling, but also I'm crazy practical about things. So I'm doing that now, and people again are finding it very helpful.
Yeah. And so is that like a 15-minute monologue kind of a teaching? Is
It
that
is. Mhm.
okay? Great. Well, that makes sense because, even your voice and your presence, those who are going to watch this on YouTube or watching this on YouTube, you do kind of have that presence of what I would expect of a counselor, which are you still a licensed counselor? I know
I
that that's
am, but
what
I'm
you
not
did.
practicing
You're
anymore.
not practicing. Well, you're not practicing it unless someone comes and lays down on the couch, right? But uh, probably over a meal or over a desk or whatever, in kind of a different format for yourself. So okay, so because as I recall, you said you had a 25-year run as a counselor. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
So how long have you been a business coach? And that's what you call it, right? Yeah, business
Mhm.
coach.
I was a business coach for about 15 years. So right now I'm just kind of calling myself a coach and a spiritual director because I'm doing more of the soul care. But I was doing business coaching for about 15 years, went back and got certified as a coach and then as a business coach. And I still train other coaches. But yeah, coaching kind of had that forward movement to it, which was
Yeah.
appealing. Counseling is great to do the healing. But sometimes it just left people, like you said, at the starting line and not sure how to take their next steps. And so coaching is really helpful for that kind of thing.
That's really good insight. So, and speaking of insight, let's talk about what you and I have learned in working with people as a forward-thinking idea, moving people forward, moving businesses forward, helping leaders. What would you say the greatest felt needs that you've noticed in working with people? What are people sharing with you? Now, just a couple minutes ago, you said the burden is heavy.
Hmm.
Right. But what are some of the specific things that you've encountered that you find um, folks are willing to get help for?
Yeah. Well, that's what's so interesting about, I think, kind of the shift we're seeing in society because people's felt needs are not necessarily what they really need. I
That's
think
so
that's
true.
changing a little bit, but especially during business coaching, I mean, people want to make a profit. They want to grow the business. They want to get their systems in place. They want it to be easy, which is a lofty goal. Um, and all of those things. And that's often what brought them into business coaching. And sometimes it's even the kind of thing that brings people into counseling or spiritual direction is the symptoms of their life have risen to the level of great discomfort. And so we're always either moving towards pleasure or away from pain. And we're 80% more likely, I think, to move away from pain than towards pleasure. So it's often just a discomfort with our life. And those are the felt needs. The difficulty, and I'm sure you experience this as well, Jim, is that if this symptom were something that were easily fixed, they would have fixed it. They
Yeah.
wouldn't be coming in for help. And it's because there's often a thing beneath the thing, as it were, right? There's something different that's causing them to, not be able to succeed in this particular area. And so that's really, the kind of work I like to help people understand what is it at a personal level, relational level, spiritual level that could be adjusted, that could really change a lot of things for you.
Give me an example of what some of those underlying challenges are. I know that for me, there is a lack of confidence that I run into. Uh, Men and women, sometimes for similar reasons, sometimes for different reasons. But that'd be one example. And so what that looks like for me is when I see things in them that they don't recognize in themselves. At least this is my approach. I point it out what I see, and then I'll challenge them or I'll ask them if they've leveraged that, if they've tried it this way or that way, or we'll even create assignments to do that. And when they see some movement, when they see some forward movement in some of these assignments, they naturally gain confidence in that. But that's one example. Do you have other examples that you run
Yeah.
into?
So I just want to affirm and agree with what you just said too, because I often tell people confidence never comes in advance. I mean,
Right.
people think, okay, when I have the confidence, then I will do the thing. And confidence comes right from doing the thing and seeing that you're able to do the thing. And so I love your approach with that. But to your other question, I think one of the most common mindsets, especially against people who are in business, is kind of this determination because they're talented people, they're motivated people, they're high achievers. There's this, if it's going to be, it's up to me kind of mentality that is ingrained. And I'm putting myself squarely in that group, in that category. And so if what we're doing isn't quite getting us the results we want, we assume we need to double down and dig in and do
Try
it better
harder.
or harder or faster or
Yeah.
more. And
Yeah.
there's so many situations, and even neuroscience is showing, how valuable daydreaming is, how valuable sleep is, how valuable variety and going for a walk in nature is. But for people who are used to driving the bus and holding tightly to the wheel, to let go for a few minutes and to find that's actually more effective than that constant determination and striving is it's a huge leap of faith, but it's really powerful and valuable. And so I think that's one of the mindsets that we're just continually working on.
So you were talking about, I wrote it down. If it's going to be, it's up to me. And I do see people try harder doing the same thing. And sometimes that, that comes in the sense of perseverance or persistence. But if it looks like banging your head against the wall, then that's insanity because, it's going to kill you. And discerning, is it because of my lack of persistence and perseverance versus, and you and I talked about it a little bit before we hit the record button. And I'm not going to go into the 4 quadrants of time management, but those, because I think it's literally a waste of time to talk about 3 and 4 because they're just not useful. They're destructive. But quadrant 1 is the idea that this thing, whatever it is, or these things, whatever they are, these activities, these behaviors, these tasks, these due dates, these et cetera, they are important and they are urgent.
Yeah.
And I've given quadrant 1 the nickname of the adrenaline quadrant because a lot of us, we just get up and go. And we think that, if we got 15 things done today, we feel like it's a victory just to wake up tomorrow and find that we've got 30 more things to do and it never ends. That's the nature of quadrant 1. The nature of quadrant 1, where we see everything as important and everything as urgent, is when that adrenaline is going, that's all we can see. And we can't even discern these other ideas that I wrote down while you were talking. Quadrant 2 would be things like rest. Quadrant 2 would be things like evaluation. Quadrant 2 would be things like you said, daydreaming, dreaming. Another one, which is kind of a spiritual idea of all these things. I mean, I think rest is a spiritual idea, but maybe to go even deeper, there is rest, and then there is surrender.
Mm-hmm.
Rest implies that as soon as I'm done, I'm going to get up. Surrender implies I'm at the mercy of. And I think both of those ideas are there. But when we haven't surrendered ultimately ourselves to the idea of where you and I first began talking about, that we do believe in the God of the universe, and that, yes, he has empowered us. He has even commissioned us. And he, like any father, would want to see us be productive and successful, whatever that word means, and would find joy in us doing that. At the same time, he wouldn't want us to get into that hamster wheel trap of quadrant 1 where we just burn out our
Amen.
lives going hard, but not sure where we are going. Whereas quadrant 2 is an opportunity to adjust the compass, to see where we're at, see where we want to go, and then begin making, steps in that direction. So I agree with you. And business leaders are often the people who make things happen. They provide jobs for other people. They provide hope for other people. A lot of people count on them. And once upon a time, they enjoyed the work of their own hands.
Mm.
And then if they learned how to scale, they created an opportunity for others. And then all of a sudden, their place in life has changed significantly from being a doer, a performer, a contributor, to somebody that has created a certain something that provides more than what their hands can possibly do. But with that even comes more responsibility, especially, Kim, I would say in quadrant 2, which is really, and this is an old cliche, but quadrant 2 is about working on your life, not just in it. Quadrant 2 is about working on your business, not just in it. And then going to your statement, how did you say it? We're either moving towards pleasure,
away from pain, or towards pleasure.
Yeah. And that, and I think that's I would like to talk about that for a little bit.
Sure.
Hey everybody, we're going to take a brief break from the Today Count show just to let you know that our very own Jim Piper has released a brand new book called Story: The Art of Learning from Your Past. And this is going to be for anyone who's looking to make a change in their life. If you feel stuck, if you want to grow beyond your current position, man, we just believe there are stories and truths in this book that will help you move into the future with a different perspective. We all have a story, and we can learn from that story to propel us into a strong future. Be sure to grab Story where books are sold, Amazon and wherever you find books. All right, back to the podcast.
How can we encourage people to take another look at that fork in the road? And is it a fork in the road, or can it be something more than a fork in the road?
I think traditionally, and the majority of people kind of don't move off that fork or off center, right? Until that pain motivates them to think, okay, it's, because change is risky and change is hard. And so the pain of the current circumstances have risen to the level where I'm willing to risk change, and all that it entails. So that's the pain that moves us off center. Or again, it's much more enjoyable to be pulled forward by vision. So a vision of something better, something more full, something more enjoyable, more relaxing, whatever it is, often can pull us. So something has to get us moving. Otherwise, we're stuck on dead center. But once we're moving, I think we can discover, as you said, kind of the joy of whatever this new path is. So the Lord willing, we would keep momentum. What causes people to get discouraged and despair is when it feels like nothing's moving at all, kind of like the doldrums if you're out on a ship. You don't want to be in that position at all. So any sort of movement feels good. I think we were created for movement and growth, internal growth as well as external growth. So it's helpful to pay attention to our character development as well, because sometimes when we're not physically moving forward, our character is developing and we're becoming more the person we want to be. But yeah, once we get moving, then I think we can move away from the pain principle and say, what's my picture? What's my, what am I enthralled with? What am I so captivated by that I'm willing to take risk. I'm willing to take on additional responsibility. I'm willing to take a new direction when I'm not sure where it's going to lead. Yeah.
What drew you into counseling in the first place, and now coaching?
Counseling, I distinctly remember just being a member in a church and looking around, sitting at the back of the sanctuary one Sunday and thinking, everybody's smiling, but Susie, her teenager's in a mess. And that couple over there, they're headed for divorce and they're in so much pain. And just the church I was in, the Sunday sermon and Sunday school program weren't enough to help people, who had needs like that. So at the time, counseling was the best way to come alongside people and help them And it's a wonderful, and I'm still a firm believer, obviously, in counseling. But counseling often brings people up to healing, kind of back to where everybody else, in one sense is starting. And so when coaching came into the picture, that new discipline, which is wonderful, it was 2006 for me that I trained to become a coach. Just that forward movement, that goal, the pleasure, the dream, the momentum that comes. It was just so attractive to me. I have a forward moving personality, I think, by nature. And so I just was still helping people, but maybe in a slightly different way.
Yeah, I wrote down the word conversation, just like you said, the program of the weekend experience in a church is helpful, but it's lacking the back and forth nature of, human conversation, which, depending upon one's theology, can also seem as a very spiritual thing. Not that the one-way communication isn't, but that gives what it gives. And then you have this other aspect of talking about things, finding a safe place to say something out loud and see how that lands, not just for the other person hearing it, but even for yourself, watching the reaction of somebody else,
Yes.
getting somebody else's, perspective. I know that even, and I don't know how buttoned up your coaching process is, but I definitely have my opinions on things. But I have found that in the middle of a conversation with a client, I will change direction. I will, after getting more information, after thinking about it more, I find that not only does the conversation hopefully help the client, but I learn and grow as well.
Of course.
In fact, one of the things I share with all my clients is I said, I kind of feel like a cheater sometimes because I get to work with X amount of clients who are involved in so many different kinds of things that I'm always the guy trying to catch up and learn. And I learn, from everybody. But I would say that the power of advising, coaching, consulting, if you take the specialty idea out of consulting just for a minute, and you engage in the idea of us, we, doing things together.
Mhm.
I think the power is in the conversation. To me, that is interesting. I also, thought you said something right in the front end of our time together. I asked you, why did you write the prayer powered book? And the first thing you said is that you needed it. You needed it. And I would say that I don't, I'm reaching for numbers out of the sky, obviously, but I'm going to come up with a percentage of the products that I have created and where they came from. Some of those products have come from the needs of the client. I mean, that's where it originated. And so I had to think about it and problem solve and, do some research and see if, the wheel was already made somewhere else or whatever. But the stuff that has stuck, the stuff that I still use today over and over again have been things that I've had to work through in my own life and develop, let's just say for my own sake, not realizing how evergreen it was, and then became useful for others. That's kind of what I heard you say, about the book that you wrote. And actually, my advising construct, my coaching construct has come from that. It has come from a belief that I've always had in business and in sports and things like that is if you want to move something forward significantly, you have to isolate it.
Yes.
You really have to set it aside and go after, that thing. Businesses that try to add are often unsuccessful because it doesn't have the attention, doesn't get the attention that it needs. It's kind of like, you have one child and that child is going to get a lot of your attention. You have two children and you got to figure that out. And you got three, which they say is always not the good number. Then you have four. And then there's new dynamics that happen where the kids then become something to one another as well as the covering of the parents. So they're different dynamics. But the thing that I would have us all wonder about is, in the case of one child or 4 children, everybody needs concentration on the dynamics just change and how that comes. The needs still have to be to be met. So I would imagine that all the people that you sat with for 25 years, the business coaching that you're doing now, leaning more on the the soul side and the personal development side of that, I bet you a lot that you talk about comes from your bank of history, and maybe even more so how you're working through the challenges in your own life today that many might not even know about, or how you work through things in your past or didn't work through things in your past and the results of that. All of those words to say, I don't think I can be effective and my work not be incarnate,
Yeah.
kind of flowing through me. What are your
Oh, that's
thoughts
beautifully
about that?
said. That's so good, because the human experience in so many ways is universal. But in other ways, it needs to be contextualized for each of us. And so, the principles, God's truths work for all of us, and they apply to all of us. But conversation, as you were saying, is what gives the space for me to understand that the person across the screen from me, in a sense, is a different sibling in the family. They're in a different business, in a different location, with different strengths. And so we have to take these universal principles, which is what we get on Sunday morning, right? Which are so good, and say, so how do you contextualize that and particularize that to what it is you're doing in your world? And they don't know, and I don't know, but we know the principle is true and God is faithful. And so it allows a conversation. And then just a quick example, when you were talking years ago, my son, when he was in school, he struggled with math. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree. And so we sent him to several different math tutors, none of which were successful. And then finally found one lady who is just the gem, and it did the trick. And I was thanking her one day, I'm so glad you're so good at math and that you can help Jonathan. And she laughed and she said, oh, no, I'm not good at math at all. And I said, well, he's making all this growth with you. She said, no, that's why. Because I'm not naturally good at math. And so I had to learn how to do it. And because I had to learn how to do it, I can help other people learn how to do it. And I think that's a similar principle to what you're saying about my prayer-powered entrepreneur book, about my Pace of Grace journey. These are things I want to learn, and I'm learning. And so I'm so attentive to what's working, what's not working. What are my curiosities? What are my questions? What are my challenges? Because I'm really into it. And so I'm able to give people kind of a roadmap, even though it'll be different for them, because I'm paying a lot of attention to this one thing that I'm really immersed in.
That's really good. It's a little bit off topic, but I have found it difficult to teach things that I do naturally or supernaturally. You pick the word you'd rather have, but things that come easy to me have been difficult to teach. Things that I've had to learn, to your point of this tutor, for some reason, I guess because I remember the steps,
Yes.
when you're just naturally gifted in doing something, I don't think it's a far reach to say it's in your DNA, it's in your makeup, it's in your intuition. It just, pours out of you. And I think everybody has those things.
Sure.
But they usually become something that we all admire versus something that person breaks down into a workshop and says, all right, here's how you can do what I do. Most of the people who are very successful at saying, hey, here's how I do what I do, they had to learn literally how to do it step by step by step. They weren't stopped in midstream and say, how are you doing that? They didn't know what to say. And I'm just saying that because I remember one time when I was in a staff meeting, and I'm not going to get into detail because it take too much time, but I had this thing called my notebook. I carried this before the laptops and all of that, and I had this notebook, but this notebook had a very, very small what do you call those things? The loops or whatever you call the
Yeah,
things.
that your pen holder goes in or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, where you actually put your note paper in.
Okay.
It's a 1/2 inch, it's a 3/4 inch, 1 inch, whatever that is. Spindle. I don't know what that is.
Okay.
And I had it really small. And and I carried it around with me everywhere. I was running a large organization, and during a staff meeting, someone asked me what it was, and I held it up because it had a title that I put on it, and they said, "What is it?" And I literally was stopped in my tracks, because administration is a gift that I have. I do it without thinking about it. And I actually had to ask the team if I could have a couple weeks to think through how you do this and why you do it, because it was so natural to me. And the funny thing is I hate it putting that together, because to me it just seemed like such common sense, even though it's actually unique, to a gift. But going back to the confidence statement I made, I think that's kind of my angle. Is I really focus on people's strengths that are clear to me, and instead of them focusing on what they can't seem to bring to the table, I try to help them leverage what they have, and then build team around what they don't have, or what the team needs. And that's nothing new. I mean, I think Gallup and the Strengths Finder that's been their focus for a long time. And it's really not a theory. You just see it in life. You let people do what they're really good at, and then build team. Now you've got the best of both worlds. You've got community, you've got interdependence, and you also got something that you can do to contribute. And that's an important part to me. How long do you work with somebody typically who becomes one of your clients?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. That's just such a dependent question. But one of the first conversations I have with them is just we do need to acknowledge that real change takes time. Again, if it were a simple, easy answer, people they've already bought the book. They bought the course. They've tried all the solutions. And it's not that every step is difficult. Change is iterative, but we often experiment and we learn, oh, that didn't work. Oh, that did work. And it's just so helpful to have someone alongside keeping track of those experiments with us, noticing objectively, yes, but here's a piece that, didn't miss. Or did you notice how easy that was for you? No, I really didn't. Yeah, that seems to be a sweet spot. And so all of those things. So deep change takes time, but it's worth it, because then you don't have to revisit those qualities again and again. They're there.
How do people find out about you, Kim?
Different ways. I train other coaches at the Professional Christian Coaching Institute, and I've probably been doing that for about 12 years. I have 2 podcasts. One is Professional Christian Coaching Today, and the other one is the Pace of Grace podcast. And I used to do a lot of public speaking before the pandemic, but I've gotten kind of used to being on the Zoom screen. So I don't do that as much anymore. I like staying home.
Yeah, I once heard that the pandemic didn't change anything. It just accelerated certain things that was already there. And I think in a lot of ways that's true. I know that before the pandemic, I just couldn't understand why so many corporations, though they had a lot of money, would almost demand that I get on a plane, and fly to such and such place, get hotels, have an expensive food stipend, charge for my time being there, which, every good advisor knows you don't charge for time. You charge for what you're able to accomplish during that time because of, where you've come from, whatever. And they just would not consider video work. And I can understand that. In the beginning, you might want to meet somebody face to face, whatever, but ongoing, I never could understand that. But the pandemic did change that. Mm-hmm. Now, I rarely have to go do that. I still do that, but it's usually because of the bigger gatherings, the larger gatherings, and but the smaller team and individual stuff, video conferencing has really allowed us to do more without missing too much. Once you have that relationship. How long do you think you're going to be doing this, Kim?
Well, I hope as long as I'm moving. I have just, I think we were made to contribute.
Yes.
I think it brings great joy to be able to contribute and to sow into, the world is so needy, right? To sow into the world in ways that God has gifted us and is growing us. And so, yeah, I'm in it for the long haul, but sustainable is different. A lot of people have set up a business that is not sustainable in its current model. So I've really had to readjust my business with that longer term vision in mind. How do I want this to be sustainable for the long term? I don't always want to be flying around the country speaking. I don't always want to be doing this or that. So really reorganized my business. And I love its current iteration.
Well, that's great. That's great. Let's talk about one more question before we sign off.
Yes.
So how often do you get involved with folks that, they're thinking about retirement, they're approaching retirement, they're even wondering if retirement is a thing for them versus some cultural deal. Do you deal much with that?
I do. It's a season of life which naturally brings up questions that we've been able to kind of push down and avoid in the hustle and bustle of everyday life and living. But when we look at a change, again, maybe the pain or pleasure of retirement, depending on how you look at it. But when we look at that big juncture and that fork in the road, we're suddenly asking questions. Back to, you were talking about identity a while ago. Who am I beyond this role? Right? Beyond a paycheck, a piece of paper that says I'm worth this much. Who am I? And do I really love golf that much or whatever it is? And how can I contribute? And I will say for some positions in work, it's harder to make a natural switch. Because the company says, no, we're done. You're retiring. Here's your package. You're out. And so they're almost starting something new. And that seems a little bit of intimidation. But as a coach, it's just a natural place for those big questions of life and permission just to really think about, God still has me here. It must be for a reason, whether it's paid or nonprofit, whatever it is. People they were made to contribute. And that's where we find our greatest joy and satisfaction.
I had a good friend staying over at our house over the weekend, and we're approximately, in the same season of life. And while we're sitting out by the hot tub, we were discussing, these kinds of things. And I think they are important discussions. I don't think folks should just, rush into that next phase in life because everybody else does, but give some thought to it. Some prayer to it and whatever. Well, Kim, I have enjoyed meeting you. I've enjoyed our conversation. I hope you have as well.
I have. Thank you so much for a great conversation and lots of food for thought, Tim.